Three companies you have never heard of secretly agreed to slow down their own factories, and by doing it, they set the price of the steel box that carries almost everything you own. They installed 87 surveillance cameras across 49 production lines. Not to catch thieves, to catch each other. If one factory ran an extra shift, the cameras would see it, and that company would be fined by the other two. This is not a theory. It is written into an American federal indictment filed in 2026. The box these three companies build is the shipping container. Every phone, every car part, every piece of furniture, every pair of shoes in your home crossed an ocean inside one. And more than 96% of the dry containers on Earth, along with 100% of the refrigerated ones, are built by factories in a single country, China, concentrated inside three firms, CIMC, Fang, and CXIC. The biggest of the three, CIMC, builds roughly a container every 3 to 4 minutes. It is 6 times larger than its nearest competitor. When you see a container stacked at a port, the giant letters on the side say Maersk or Evergreen or MSC. Those are just the renters. Look at the small metal plate near the door. Almost every time, the name that actually built the box is Chinese, and almost every time it is one of these three. This matters because whoever controls the container controls a hidden switch on global trade. And right now, that switch sits inside a system the rest of the world cannot copy. Start with the object itself, because the container is the reason modern trade exists at all. Before it, cargo was loaded piece by hand, and a ship could sit in port for a week while men carried boxes and barrels up a gangway. The steel container changed everything. Suddenly, a crane could lift a sealed box off a truck, drop it onto a ship, and that same box could travel from a factory in China to a warehouse in Ohio without a single person opening it. Around 90% of everything traded on the planet now moves inside one of these boxes. It is the most important object in global trade, and it looks like nothing, a corrugated steel rectangle. That is exactly why almost no one asks who builds them. The answer is that they are built in remarkably few places, or really in one place. And to understand why that is so hard to change, you have to look at what the box is actually made of. A standard container is about 4 tons of a special weather-resistant steel, an alloy that rusts on the surface on purpose to protect the layers underneath. That controlled surface rust is why a container can sit in salt air for 20 years and not fall apart. China produces more of that steel than every other country on the planet combined. In 2024, Chinese crude steel output was around 1 billion tons, more than half of all the steel made on Earth and more than 10 times the output of India in second place. So follow the logic a competitor would face. Say a factory in India or Vietnam wants to build the box cheaper. It would still have to buy the raw steel from China, because that is where the steel is. It would have to pay to ship that heavy steel in. Then it would build the container, and then it would have to send the empty box back across the ocean to where the cargo actually is, because an empty container sitting in the wrong country earns nothing. The cost falls apart at every step. This is the part almost everyone gets wrong. The monopoly is not really about cheap Chinese labor. Labor in Vietnam is already competitive. The monopoly is about controlling the material the box is made from and the demand that consumes it. China is not just the biggest builder of containers. It is the biggest buyer, because it is the biggest exporter. It builds the boxes and then fills them with its own goods. No new entrant can match that closed loop. And the three companies knew exactly how strong their position was. Which brings us back to the cameras. In late 2019, executives from CIMC, Fang, and CXIC met at CIMC's headquarters in Shenzhen. According to the indictment, they agreed to limit shifts and hours on their dry container production lines. The goal was simple: choke the supply of new boxes so the price of every box would rise. A fourth firm, Singamas, joined the arrangement a few months later. Together, these companies already built the overwhelming majority of the world's containers, so an agreement between them was not a normal business deal. It was closer to a decision about how much of a critical global resource the planet would be allowed to have. To make the agreement hold, they needed a way to catch cheating. Because in any cartel, the temptation is always for one member to quietly run extra shifts and grab market share while everyone else holds back. So they built an enforcement system, 87 surveillance cameras across 49 production lines, so each company could watch whether the others were actually keeping their factories slowed. They set up a financial penalty mechanism to punish any member that produced more than its agreed share. This is what makes the case so striking. It was not a loose understanding. It was an engineered, monitored, self-policing machine designed to keep the world short of containers. The effect on price was immediate and enormous. CIMC container manufacturing profit went from about $20 million in 2019 to $288 million in 2020, and then to $1.75 billion in 2021. Syngenta swung from a $100 million loss to a nearly $200 million profit in a single year. Now line that up against what the rest of the world remembers from that period. 2021 was the height of the global shipping crisis. Store shelves were empty, businesses could not get their goods. The cost to ship a single container jumped to 5, 6, 10 times its normal rate. Part of that was the pandemic. But part of it was that the only companies who could make the boxes were, according to this indictment, deliberately choosing to make fewer of them at the exact moment the world was desperate for more. This is the moment the pattern becomes clear, and it is the same pattern this channel has traced through cranes, through ships, and through ports. State capital builds an industry the rest of the world walks away from. Prices are set below what any private company could survive. Competitors close, and once the manufacturing lies in one place, a small group of firms can quietly coordinate to control output and price, because there is no one left outside the room to undercut them. The container is not the exception in the maritime supply chain. It is the clearest example of the whole design. And here's the part that should bother anyone in Washington. A commissioner at the Federal Maritime Commission spent a full year investigating this and published a report saying plainly that America is completely reliant on equipment controlled by a state-linked monopoly that appears able to manipulate prices. Read that again. A sitting U.S. regulator concluded that a single foreign group controls the supply of the box that carries American trade, and that it may be rigging the price. And the honest conclusion of that investigation was that beyond expressing concern, there is almost nothing the United States can actually do about it. You cannot regulate a factory that sits in another country. You cannot force a competitor to exist. You cannot conjure 4 decades of manufacturing scale out of a press release. The Justice Department did manage one move years earlier. It blocked Maersk from selling its refrigerated container manufacturing unit to a Chinese buyer, because that single sale would have handed China 100% of the reefer market outright. It slowed one deal. It did not touch the 96%, and the 2026 indictment is an attempt to reach across the ocean and punish the coordination directly. Whether an American court can actually enforce anything against factories on Chinese soil is a very different question. Other countries are trying to break in right now because everyone can see how dangerous the concentration is. India is pushing hard to build its own container industry and treat it as a matter of national security. Vietnam and Bangladesh are angling for a slice, offering competitive pricing and closeness to key shipping hubs. But they are all starting from almost nothing against companies that have spent 40 years building a catalog of more than 900 different container types, from folding boxes to tank containers to refrigerated units, and locking in every major shipping line on long-term contracts. A shipping line does not switch a 40-year supplier relationship to an unproven new factory to save a few percent. Realistically, the earliest these challengers can hope to matter is inside their own domestic markets, not across the global fleet. The grip holds. So think about the box the next time a delivery lands on your doorstep. The thing inside it was carried across the ocean in a steel container that was almost certainly built by one of 3 companies in one country that were caught on their own cameras agreeing to build fewer of them so they could charge you more. The container looks like the most boring object in global trade. It is actually one of the most quietly controlled, and the people who control it can move the cost of nearly everything you buy without ever touching the thing you bought.